Alright, well, this is it. The final installment of our Bleach the Gotei 13 series. After over a year of not missing a single month of talking about an individual division each month, it's now time to talk about the last division of the Gotei 13, the 13th division itself. And I just want to say before we begin, a huge thank you to everyone for tuning in each month to talk about these individual divisions. It's been a lot of fun, and now we need to work out what series to do next. I feel like this is going to potentially be a slightly longer one due to a certain character who has, shall we say, a fairly big role to play in Bleach, so let's just dive right in. Before we get to that, however, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up as well to help support me and the channel. And if you want to take that support for me another step further, I also have a Patreon as well. And as always, I want to give a massive shout out and say a huge thank you to everyone supporting me over there on Patreon. I really do appreciate it. And as always with our Gotei 13 videos, there will be spoilers for the entirety of the 1000-year Blood War arc ahead. So the 13th division, I think it's fair to say they've always been a unique one, whether that's their unique hierarchical structure, which isn't really replicated in any of the other divisions due to the fact that their captain is often sickly, he's often not around to perform his duties, so other people have had to pick up the slack there, or it's due to the fact that they don't really have any kind of standout qualities or special duties. In many ways, they feel like the most quote-unquote ordinary division perhaps to be a part of. There are some other divisions a bit like that in the Gotei itself, but the 13th division really encapsulates that idea best, I think. It feels like in some ways they have a small presence in the story and the world of Bleach because of having a sickly captain and not even having a vice captain for half the story. But thanks, of course, to the overwhelming presence of Rukia Kuchiki as effectively Bleach's deuteragonist for years until maybe halfway through the story where she does become ever so slightly less prominent. Actually, in reality, the 13th division is perhaps one of, if not the most heavily involved of them all, which is actually pretty cool, I think. One of the things that has always really stood out to me about the 13th division, despite them not having any kind of traits that would make them stand out that you might think. You know, they're not these crazed scientists, they're not these battle-loving warriors, but they are a heartwarming division. They seem to be, you know, perhaps the kindliest, warmest of all the 13, built on what seem to be the foundations of trust, friendships, and loyalty, as well as caring for your own. If I had to be a member of any division in the series, I think 13 has to be pretty high on that list, just because it does seem to be, in many places, kind of the nicest place to be. Even if that does mean they don't stand out in other ways. And so then, if we move on to a sort of general overview of the division itself, this is another division where we've seen a lot of the faces in this division throughout the story of Bleach. It's had a change in captain, it's had a change in vice captain, all of those kind of positions have been shaken up a bit, which tends to be quite interesting, I think, and the 13th division is another one of these ones where you really get a great impression of the passage of time. This division evolves quite a lot throughout the story, and goes from being one of the sort of stranger ones in terms of its structure to having a perfectly normal structure by the end of the series. In many ways, due to Rukia's prominence in the series as one of, if not the second main character of Bleach, the 13th division kind of feels in many ways almost like the audience surrogate division. Like, this is the division that experiences the events of Bleach and we kind of follow that division through everything. And I think that's reflected in the way we see Rukia grow and evolve alongside the division itself. As the story of Bleach progresses, so too does Rukia's natural journey as a Shinigami through the ranks of going from an unseated officer to eventually making it to the very top as captain. And so speaking of that, the current captain of the 13th division is none other than Rukia Kuchiki, a well-earned position, and her vice captain is Sentaro Kotsubaki, who of course has been promoted from the 3rd seat, a position he used to share with Kione Kotetsu, but she has since been transferred to the 4th division to work with her sister. Other members of the 13th division that we can at least assume to be alive include Kuremadani Zenosuke, who used to be the representative for Karakura Town, as well as those two newbie Shinigami that we saw at the very beginning of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, Yuki Ryunosuke and Shino Madarame. Other characters who have been a part of this division before, of course, include the former captain and the character who was the captain for the entirety of the Bleach storyline up until the very end, Jushiro Ukitake, one of the oldest and most well-respected captains of the Gotei 13, but also somebody who was afflicted with a horrible, debilitating illness. His vice captain is a very interesting character, Kaien Shiba, a character who was dead before the main Bleach storyline began, yet for a deceased character, we know a surprising amount about him, and he has a surprising amount of screen time, considering he's never actually been alive during the present-day storyline. And I always, again, found that to be very interesting as well, because it always did kind of emphasise the gaping hole, the wound left over in the 13th Division, that Kaien was never replaced until Rukia finally got that promotion, a sizable promotion, by the way, going from an unseated officer to vice captain. That's moving about 20 or about 19 ranks or so in one go. Not to say she didn't deserve it, because obviously she did and she was being held back by Byakuya, but it's still pretty funny to see nonetheless. But it's also, of course, very fitting that she would be the one to finally step into his shoes, into that space, that void that he left. And then, of course, the former third seats were Kiyone Kotetsu and Sentaro Kotsubaki. They shared that position. Again, another very unique piece of structure with this division. And the former sixth seat was Hidetomo Kajamaru, who was killed at the beginning of the 1000-Year Blood War arc. And then if you want to stretch way back, even to before the time of Ukitake himself, we now know that the original, the very first captain of the 13th Division was the very creepy and sinister-looking elderly man, Saizo Sakahone. So going back to this idea of the 13th Division having a very unique structure and a very unique feel as a result, due to Ukitake's illness, due to his status, he is often missing from captain meetings and other such events. I mean, for example, he's not even around for about the first half of the Soul Society arc. He misses that initial captain's meeting where we actually get to meet each and every one of them. So normally he would have his vice captain be his stand-in, but of course for the vast majority of like the last 50 years or so, the division has had no vice captain at all and instead operates with those two third seats, not only making it feel unique, but like I said earlier, diminishing its presence overall because it's got no vice captain, it's got no captain a lot of the time. It has no presence in any of those decision-making meetings. But like I said, by the end of the series, the 13th Division has gone through this growth, this evolutionary journey to kind of come out the other side with a pretty normal structure, with a working captain and a vice captain. What's interesting, speaking about Rukia's promotion to the captaincy, is that she gets that promotion. She is inaugurated in as captain 10 years after Yhwach's death, which is intriguing to me because it means that presumably the division had no captain at all for a decade after the 1000-Year Blood War, which is odd because Rukia had a bankai by then, so I'm surprised she wasn't promoted almost immediately. She was quite obviously capable for the job. It is possible, of course, that the Soul Society in general, having defeated this empire, their enemy, and seemingly were totally in the clear, decided to focus more on rebuilding efforts first, actually making sure the Seirete didn't completely collapse, and then decide to deal with housekeeping efforts like this, because of course by the time we get to this point in the story where Rukia is being inaugurated, the Soul Society has literally only just finished their cleanup operation. But anyway, with Sentaro now as the vice captain and Kiyone being transferred to the 4th Division, the new third seat of the division is totally unknown. Now, like I said, the 13th Division kind of feels like the ordinary division, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but they have no special duties, they have no big role or any special jobs in the world of the Gotei 13 itself, but they are well known for being the official representatives of Karakura Town itself, once again intimately tying them to the main story and helping them kind of come across, again, like I said, as that audience stand-in as far as the Gotei 13 goes, in that they don't have any special role to play in the world of the Gotei 13 itself. Instead, they're just easily the ones most intimately tied to our main central plotline itself. The 13th Division's barracks are mostly the same as normal, except they also contain Ukitake's personal quarters known as the Ugendo quarters, which we get to see a couple of times. The very first time he shows up in the series, I believe we get to see it, and we also get to see it towards the end of the Lost Agent arc as well. But it's a serene building atop a sort of koi pond where Ukitake often recuperates after a spell of sickness. One of the coolest developmental arcs of the 13th Division is, as I mentioned earlier, actually getting to see the growth of an officer from Rukia's perspective. Of course, characters get moved around the chessboard that is the upper echelon of the Gotei 13 quite a bit. Characters get promoted here and there, characters die later on as well. But Rukia is really the one who comes from nothing, she works her way up and ends up at the very top rung. The division's insignia is the snowdrop, which represents the first signs of spring. Therefore, the flower is seen as a symbol of new beginnings, hope, rebirth, and the ability to overcome challenges. It's an incredibly positive flower that gives both encouragement and support, and honestly, what could be more fitting for this division? In my opinion, it really embodies almost everyone, from Ukitake being supportive and encouraging, as well as his rebirth when Mimihagi saved his life all those years ago, and him overcoming the challenges that his illness brings. But of course, it also embodies Rukia, a scrappy Shinigami who has had to overcome challenge after challenge in her life, yet is always filled with hope. Even her promotion at the end after Ukitake's death is a showcase of rebirth and a new beginning for the division. It's absolutely perfect. But of course, a more on-the-nose reference as well seems to be towards Rukia's Zanpakuto, Sode no Shirayuki, often considered the most stunningly beautiful in all of Soul Society. The snowdrop can only be found in white, like her blade, and also references the cold abilities of her sword as well. Meanwhile, kind of on the flip side, the division's colour is maroon, which does feel like almost the total opposite of the serenity that's being portrayed by the snowdrop. It's a fierce colour, representing ambition and confidence, and is considered a distinct colour as well. Combining the two, in fact, gets you that striking imagery of blood splashed upon the snow. It inspires people with strength and kindness, and these are all virtues again found in the division's captain, but also more specifically in the way Rukia felt about Kaien. He inspired her when she first joined the division, when she felt like she didn't fit in, and Kaien himself comes across as, in some ways at least, an ambitious and confident character. So that's the 13th Division kind of on the whole, but what about their role in Bleach? Well, again, it's kind of a funny one. It sort of balances itself out a little bit, unlike, say, the 6th Division or maybe the 11th Division, where both the captain and the vice captain, with the 11th Division would be the 3rd and the 5th seats, are kind of almost equally portrayed. They get quite a lot of screen time together, at least. Anyway, the captain of this division does, putting this lightly, pretty much absolutely nothing in Bleach. Ukitake does virtually nothing. I would argue he is the captain with the least amount of exposure in the entire series, certainly of that original slate of captains that we first met in the Soul Society arc. I think you could maybe argue characters like Rose and Kensei definitely do less later on. Whereas, of course, on the flip side, Rukia is involved in the entire story from start to finish on a macro level. Like, she is just everywhere in Bleach. And so it kind of balances itself out nicely. And so when it comes to Rukia's involvement, we will try and cliff notes it a little bit, or else we will literally be here all day. But anyway, beginning chronologically as we always do, looking at the timeline of the 13th Division, we have to begin 1,000 years ago, where the captain of the division, the first captain of the 13th Division, part of Yamamoto's original set of captains, this brutal mob of thugs, was a man called Saizo Sakahone. Now, much like the rest of these captains, we don't really know a lot about him, but he's a very, very ancient-looking elderly man, almost skeletal in appearance, who helped defend the Seirete from Yhwach's Lichtreich invasion, and in the anime-exclusive appearance of this original battle 1,000 years ago, Saizo is seen finishing off a downed Quincy. Now, we don't know really anything about this guy. This could be a mercy killing, or it could be an almost sadistic way of toying and playing with your victims. I have to be honest, I think Saizo Sakahone looks pretty creepy, looks pretty evil in my opinion, so it could be the latter, but like I said, we have no real idea. But then moving on from that point, and you've basically got Ukitake as the captain of this division forevermore up until the very end of the series. Ukitake, of course, graduating from the Shino Academy alongside his best friend, his closest confidant, Kyoraku Shunsui, both of these guys surrogate sons of Yamamoto himself. They were the first captains from his academy. Basically, they graduated and became captains in the Gotei 13, the first people to do so from the academy that Yamamoto founded. In Turn Back the Pendulum, 110 years prior to the main storyline, Ukitake is actually present at Urahara's inauguration, walking with Kyoraku, discussing Hikifune's promotion to the Zero Division. A little bit later on, Ukitake is having tea with Kaien as they kind of discuss the newest prodigy in the academy, being Gin Ichimaru. And then, of course, at the end of the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, Ukitake is ordered by Yamamoto to remain in Seirete and guard it as its last line of defense, should whatever this mysterious assailant is that's attacking Shinigami make it that far. At some point after this, because Rukia is taken from the academy by the Kuchiki noble house, she no longer has to pass any kind of entrance exam, no longer has to worry about enlistment. Instead, she is immediately appointed to an unseated position in the 13th Division, which her older brother Byakuya doesn't seem too pleased with, though we would later find out that he is the one actively holding her back. Anyway, upon joining the 13th Division, she is continuously looked down upon as a pet of the nobility by those that actually had to work hard to get where they are, leaving Rukia to feel out of place as she has done her entire life. However, the then vice-captain Kaien Shiba steps in, takes her under his wing, claiming that she will have a friend in him for life as long as she's a member of their division. And we also get to see her meeting Kyone and Sentaro, all these characters messing around together, enjoying each other's company, and you get that continuous vibe that the 13th Division is just a bunch of friends who have each other's backs. But of course, this would all change roughly 50 to 45 years prior to the main storyline, when Kaien Shiba's wife, Miyako Shiba, the then third seat of the 13th Division, and a squad of her men were murdered by the hollow Metastasia. Desperate to avenge his fallen wife, Kaien goes to find this hollow alongside Ukitake and Rukia, discovering its lair. Now, as emotional as this scene is, and as how well done it is, I don't really know why Rukia is there, why Rukia was allowed to go. That does seem like a bit of a failure of leadership on Ukitake's part. I can maybe understand Kaien not thinking straight, but I don't really know why Ukitake felt the need to bring Rukia along, especially considering A, she's an unseated Shinigami at this point in time, but also B, Ukitake must have realised she had some kind of strong bond with Kaien, and this is clearly a hollow that is extraordinarily dangerous. Now, maybe Ukitake had the most incredible amount of faith in Kaien that he would be able to defeat Metastasia no problem, but it does still feel like a little bit of an oversight. Maybe Ukitake just wants Rukia there to learn the difference between a battle for pride and a battle for one's life, and this, of course, being a battle for Kaien's pride, meaning they cannot get involved, or else they, even if they were to save his life, they would eternally wound his pride, which, of course, in the world of the Shinigami, in a world of samurai, essentially, is incredibly important, an incredibly important lesson and credo to follow. But of course, Kaien does battle Metastasia. His Zanpakuto is destroyed thanks to its strange abilities as a result of being one of Aizen's experiments, which we talked about relatively recently. Kaien is then possessed by the Hollow. Ukitake tries to kill him, but Kaien attacks Rukia, impaling himself on her sword before dying. It's of course a very dark day, a very dark moment for the 13th Division in general. This happy-go-lucky division experiences incredible tragedy here, and yeah, it's just a really sad moment that will kind of go on to define Rukia moving forwards after this, a character who is no longer this blossoming flower, but instead continuously beats herself up inside about killing Kaien, about what happened to Kaien, and it's something that would follow her until pretty much halfway through the Arrancar Arc. The 13th Division doesn't really feature in Everything But the Rain at all, outside of that one Shinigami who is currently the representative of Karakura Town, running over to Isshin as he battles White and being instantly obliterated. And so we move on instead to the Agent of the Shinigami Arc, and of course, the very beginning of Bleach itself, that fateful night where Rukia arrives in Karakura Town and senses a presence appearing in Ichigo's bedroom, kickstarting basically the entire storyline as we know it. After Rukia accidentally transfers him all of her powers, allowing him to defeat Fishbone D, she works with him as the new substitute Shinigami of Karakura Town, taking down Hollows while meeting and getting to know his closest friends, including forming a friendship with Orihime, helping Chad battle the vicious Hollow Shrieker, and witnessing Ichigo nearly die against Grand Fisher in a moment that is reflective, of course, of her battle with Kaien. It's actually around this moment where we get a very early glimpse at Ukitake before we even know what this character looks like, who he really is. He's just a mysterious white-haired man in Rukia's memories talking about a battle for pride. Rukia sort of remains in contact with the Soul Society through association with Urahara, but her powers are slowly dwindling to almost nothing. And of course, eventually, Rukia is arrested by Byakuya and Renji and escorted back to the Soul Society to await punishment for her crime of giving Ichigo her powers. The whiplash for Rukia's character is quite interesting here, and never something I've really thought about before making this video. But Rukia goes from being a very active deuteragonist in that Agent of the Shinigami arc, where she's helping Ichigo actually take on these Monster of the Week style Hollows, to being a prisoner in the Soul Society arc, where she basically does nothing but sit in her cell for the entirety of the arc. She's initially imprisoned in the 6th Division barracks before being transported to the Senzai Q, which would be her prison for basically the remainder of the arc. While there, she can sense Ichigo and the others battling their way through the Soul Society to rescue her before she's eventually rescued by Ganju, Shiba and Hanataro, but not before Byakuya arrives. Byakuya defeats Ganju, but Ukitake appears, having been told of Aizen's death and being caught up on the situation as he was ill when the Ryoka invasion began. This is really the first time we've ever seen Ukitake in the series, and at this point we are roughly getting to about the halfway point through the Soul Society arc. But there's a nice moment, of course, where Ukitake sees Ichigo and is immediately reminded of Kaien. However, once Ichigo has been taken away, Ukitake saves everyone from Byakuya, but has Rukia return to her cell. But a nice moment here is that he shows immediately not to be as cruel and not to have the same level of animosity as most of the other captains we've seen to this point, because he sort of turns to Hanataro and says that he wouldn't have allowed Byakuya to kill him as he was trying to rescue a member of the 13th Division, and that means something to Ukitake. But Rukia's execution is then brought forward to the very next day. Ukitake, growing desperate, tries to convince Byakuya to have the execution overturned, but to no luck. But of course, Ukitake is not the kind of character to reprimand Byakuya through any kind of course of violence or anything like that. Instead, he kind of ponders what Kaien would have done in this situation, which I think is a really cool way of going about it. And so Ukitake decides to take a different course. And on the day of the execution, Rukia, now being escorted to the Sokyoku Hill, is confronted by Gin Ichimaru after sensing Renji's defeat and near death. Gin teases her about her impending doom, at which point she is then led to the Sokyoku. Ukitake, at the same time, along with Sentaru and Kione, unseals the Shihoin shield and prepares to destroy the Sokyoku in order to save Rukia themselves. This whole business with the Shihoin shield is one of the strangest mysteries in Bleach, in my opinion. It went completely unanswered. And still is unanswered. Like, why on earth does Ukitake, of all characters, have the Shihoin, have presumably an ancestral Shihoin family artifact? Why can it destroy the Sokyoku? What is its affiliation with the Sokyoku? We have absolutely no idea, and that's something that it would be cool to find out in the future, even if I don't think we ever will. At her execution, Rukia asks Yamamoto to spare Ichigo and the others before she is put to death, but Ichigo arrives at the last second and blocks the Sokyoku, which at this point has taken the form of a massive flaming bird. Before it can prepare a second attack, Ukitake and the others finally arrive, and with Kyoraku's help, completely destroy the Sokyoku itself. Rukia is then freed by Ichigo, Ichigo, who tosses her down to Renji, while Soifon attacks both Sentaro and Kione. You just see Sentaro go absolutely flying as she sort of tosses him out the way before she stomps on Kione's chest. Before Ukitake can intervene as he tries to defend them, he's confronted by Yamamoto himself, who now considers him to be a traitor against the Gotei. But Kyoraku takes Ukitake and they flee before taking on Yamamoto in an epic duel. A fair bit later, however, after all this craziness has gone on, Aizen's deception is finally revealed, and Rukia and Renji run into Tosen and are captured. Yamamoto ends his battle with Ukitake and Kyoraku upon learning the truth, and everyone heads to Sokyoku Hill. Aizen takes Rukia himself and extracts the Hogyoku from her, revealing this is what Urahara was trying to hide by having her powers disappear. When he tasks Gin with killing her, Byakuya steps in and saves her life. Aizen is then surrounded, but he escapes, and as he flees, Ukitake questions him on what his motives actually are. In the aftermath of the battle, Rukia goes to Byakuya's side where he begs for her forgiveness, revealing the truth about Hisana, his wife, and her older sister, and later Rukia visits the Shiba family home and also begs for forgiveness from Kukaku and Ganju before receiving it, as apparently Ukitake told Kukaku what actually went down all those years ago between her and Kaien. And then when Ichigo and the others arrive, signaling the end of the Soul Society arc, Rukia explains that she is going to stay in the Soul Society, and before leaving, Ukitake officially makes Ichigo a substitute Shinigami by giving him a badge in recognition. Now into the Arrancar arc, as Ichigo resumes his substitute Shinigami duties, he comes across the current representative of Karakura Town, Kuremadani Zenosuke, and presumably a member of the 13th Division, even though I'm not sure it's ever actually confirmed, but considering he is the representative of Karakura, he must be. But he claims to have never seen this badge before and has no idea what it is or what it does. Later, after Ichigo is defeated by the Espada Yami and beginning to feel incredibly depressed over the effects, over the influence of his inner hollow, Rukia finally returns to Karakura Town as part of Hitsugaya's advance unit sent to counter any potential Arrancar attacks. Rukia is able to very quickly shake Ichigo out of his funk, leading Orihime to grow jealous over her and Ichigo's close bond. When Grimmjow's gang of Arrancar arrive looking to kill anyone they can with even a trace of spiritual pressure, Ichigo goes to battle one of his fraction D-Roy Rinka, only for Rukia to step in and take over the fight using her newly returned Shinigami powers, and we finally get to see her once again dressed in the Shihakusho garb of a Shinigami officer now that her powers have finally come back. Bear in mind, we haven't seen Rukia as a Shinigami since basically Chapter 1, outside of the flashbacks with Kaien, so this is a really cool moment. And here, of course, we get the reveal of her Shikai, Sode no Shirayuki, allowing her to almost effortlessly kill D-Roy and gain her first victory of the series. However, she is then rendered unconscious by Grimmjow himself. After Ichigo vanishes, Rukia spends some time searching for him, and then she later comforts Orihime after Kisuke tells her to stay out of the battle, before later taking her to the Soul Society to train with her in the 13th Division's barracks. Ukitake watches over the two of them, talking with Hisagi about how nice it is to see that Rukia has finally made a true friend at last, as she struggles often to fit in. This is of course a nice callback to the fact we know that Rukia struggled when joining the Gotei 13. She struggled to fit in, considering she was a part of the nobility and found that friendship in Kaien, only of course to tragically lose it again. Anyway, when the Espada launched their second attack, Ukitake sends Rukia to Karakura Town, where she saves Ichigo's life by freezing Grimmjow. However, Grimmjow suddenly breaks free, grabs her head and nearly kills her, only for her to be saved by the Vizard leader Shinji. And then later, Rukia watches over Ichigo as he heals, and once he's been healed, Rukia and the others gather for a meeting with the Soul Society, though this time the topic is a dour one. Ukitake arrives and he and Yamamoto reveal what they know, that Orihime has vanished, presumably came into contact with an Arrancar, and may have even been killed. However, when Yamamoto reveals that perhaps Orihime wasn't killed and instead went with the Arrancar to Wako Mundo willingly, and therefore forbids them from going after her to save her, Rukia and the others are sadly escorted back to Soul Society in in a pretty crushing moment where Rukia is so obviously desperate to go with Ichigo, she knows he's going to go and defy them anyway, but at the moment at least it seems there's nothing they can do. And yet, when we get to the Waco Mundo arc, at some point Ukitake is informed that strangely Rukia and Renji have gone missing, and of course later the two of them do arrive in Waco Mundo itself to help Ichigo and the others rescue Orihime, defying the Soul Society itself. Rukia, using her second dance, Hakuren defeats the Sand Guardian Runuganga, and together they cross the sands, making it to the massive White Palace of Las Noches. Eventually the group decides to split up to try and find Orihime fastest, with Rukia coming into contact with the 9th Espada, Aaroniero Ararueri. Outside of those initial Privaron Espada fights, this is the first major battle of the Waco Mundo arc, and Rukia is the first person to actually take on an Espada in a battle to the death. And not only is this the first Espada fight of the Waco Mundo invasion arc, but for my money it could also be the best. There are some others that are absolutely up there as well and probably compete for this title, but certainly in regards to the Espada fights of the lower ranks, Espada 9, 8, 7, I would argue 5 even maybe as well, this is probably my favourite one of the lot. It's extraordinarily emotional and handled very, very well. Rukia battles Aaroniero, who is somehow revealed to be none other than Kaien Shiba himself, leading to Rukia having this absolute crisis, this emotional, mental breakdown. She doesn't know what to do about this anymore. She feels that she owes Kaien her life, but she's not willing to give it to him just yet, as she has to save her friend Orihime first. However, her suspicions begin to grow as Kaien seems to act oddly, seems to act erratically, and then also gives her a pretty sinister ultimatum that he wants her to make it up to him by doing nothing other than bringing him the heads of all of her friends. Realising this is an obvious step over the line, Rukia decides that this cannot be Kaien, and after battling him, after mustering all of her rage, her seething anger, she eventually uncovers his disguise, revealing the truth that he is in fact the Espada Aaroniero Ararueri, a very strange character who is a great example of a design of Kubo's that is so fascinating that we learn basically nothing about. She eventually manages to kill the Espada, being the first character to actually kill an Espada in the series, but is herself mortally wounded. And as it looks like she's maybe going to struggle to make it to Orihime, she collapses to the ground, looking like she might actually be dead. A considerable amount of time later, the 7th Espada, Zomari Leroux, appears to finish Rukia off, but he is challenged and killed by Byakuya after the captains arrive in Waco Mundo. Isane heals Rukia, who eventually wakes up and is kind of surprised to see all of these new arrivals there, but Byakuya tells her to regain her strength for the next battle to come. And then we get to the fake Karakura Town arc, and as Ichigo races to save Orihime, he's ambushed by the Exequious, but Rukia arrives along with the rest of his friends and helps to clear a path for him before she takes on the Exequious' leader, Rudborn Shailu, directly. This is one of those battles that's kind of really neat, even though in the source material it maybe makes up half a chapter at best in terms of its page count. It's really absolutely nothing, but Rudborn is such an awesome character. I just like the fact that Kubo, I guess, took the time to give him any kind of a battle at all, even if it is really short. It's really cool. But Rukia quite quickly overpowers him. Although Rudborn uses his Resurrection Arbol and begins to summon wave after wave of his skeletal soldiers, Rukia literally just freezes his branches, of course, killing his ability to do anything before he's wiped out by an enraged Yami, who then prepares to take on Rukia, Renji, and Chad. Meanwhile, in the fake Karakura town, Ukitake arrives with the other captains to battle Aizen. However, Ukitake's role here is never really taken that seriously. While Kyoraku battles the first Espada Stark, Ukitake is somehow left to deal with his Fraction Lilinet, and it's an entirely comedic fight, where Ukitake is simply swatting her aside while trying to encourage her to take him down. He's trying to almost train her, it seems like, being like, yes, you know, that's the right attitude, come at me again. But she's doing things like firing a Sero at him, but he's just like casually smacking it aside before being like, that's it now, I've had enough, I can't bear to fight you any longer, with this pained look on his face. But eventually, once Lilinet joins up with Stark, allowing him to release his Zanpakuto, Ukitake joins the battle by Kyoraku's side, and the two of them take on the Espada 2-on-1, with Ukitake utilizing Sogyo no Kotowari to reflect his Seros. What's absolutely insane is this is the closest thing Ukitake comes to an actual fight in Bleach, and it lasts for like a chapter. It's basically about a chapter, which is really crazy to me, and Ukitake is done so dirty in this series as a whole. But honestly, like, he could have done so much more here. But of course, Wonder Weiss arrives, quickly impales Ukitake, and takes him out of the fight completely. Meanwhile, back in Wako Mundo, Yami, revealing himself to be the Zero Espada, has defeated everyone but Rukia. Rukia tries to use Sokatsui to blast him in the face, but he tosses her to the ground, only for Ichigo to save her at the last minute, and she notices that something is amiss with him. So yeah, when it comes to the big final battle against the Arrancar, this is where the 13th Division definitely kind of slips a bit. I would absolutely have written and changed their roles ever so slightly, starting with actually having Rukia, Renji, and Chad manage to defeat Yami themselves, going all out against him and having a great fight, giving Chad a much-needed win, and Renji at this point in time as well, because so far he'd done nothing but lose. And then in the Karakura Town battle, I would have had Kyoraku be taken out by Wonder Weiss and eventually have Ukitake use bankai to defeat Stark. In my opinion, that would have made loads of sense. Kyoraku obviously gets major fights later on down the line anyway, and it would have given the 13th Division a better showing in this final battle, but alas, it wasn't meant to be. Also, I don't know about you, but I often forget that Rukia is totally conscious and actually around for the final part of that battle in Wako Mundo when Byakuya and Zaraki show up, Unohana, Mayuri, Isane, all these characters arrive. Rukia is around somewhere, unless of course she is up on the top of the dome helping Uryu and Orihime. But the 13th Division are not quite done in their battle against Aizen, with none other than Kuromadani Zenosuke confronting the big bad Aizen himself in the real Karakura Town, only to barely make him bat an eyelid after he uses his Shikai. But later, after Aizen has been defeated, Rukia arrives by Ichigo's side and watches in horror as he collapses to the ground, beginning to lose his Shinigami powers. In the Soul Society, Ukitake, now healed, muses that Yamamoto is still the only man capable of being Captain Commander, and a month later, when Ichigo awakens, Rukia explains that his powers are beginning to fully disappear. The two of them walk outside and share a genuinely emotional farewell, as at the end of the Arrancar arc, Rukia vanishes from Ichigo's sight completely. It's a really effective closer for the arc, even if you do have to kind of forget that Ichigo is the only person that can't see Rukia in this moment. Of course, from the perspective of the protagonist, it's very emotional, but then Rukia can sort of just wave to everyone else and be like, alright guys, I'll catch up with you at some point in the future. Other than that, it's a very, just a brilliant moment, particularly in the anime, where the animation was just completely off the charts here. But we move on to the Lost Agent arc, and of course the Gotei 13 in general are barely in this story arc, so really, the amount that Rukia gets to do here is quite a bit in comparison to a lot of characters. At some point during his Fullbring training, Ichigo hears Rukia's voice through his substitute badge. He hears that she is protesting to somebody about Ichigo himself. Later on, Rukia is seen, or at least hinted to be, working with Isshin and Urahara to prepare something or other, which is much later revealed to be a method of restoring Ichigo's Shinigami powers. She arrives to save Ichigo in his darkest moment with Urahara and Isshin, and by stabbing him through the back with a glowing sword of Reishi, restores his Shinigami powers to him in a triumphant moment. Of course, a very nice, obvious, but great callback to when she first gives him powers at the start of Bleach. But as his powers return, Rukia confronts the Fullbringer Riruka in one of Yukio's game rooms. They battle briefly, with Rukia being turned into a plushie as Riruka explains the history of execution, but Rukia is able to get one up on her. However, despite this, Rukia activates a strange ability and disappears. During his battle with Ginjo, who is revealed to be the first substitute Shinigami before Ichigo, Ichigo learns that Ukitake is the man behind the substitute Shinigami program, and he is the one who initially betrayed Ginjo, or so Ginjo thinks. Anyway, Ginjo believes that Ukitake basically lied to both of them about the real kind of purpose behind the substitute Shinigami badge, and that the entire Soul Society has effectively conspired against them. However, Ichigo doesn't really want to hear it, and Rukia watches as he activates his brand new bankai. As Ichigo continues his conversation with Ginjo, he determines that Ukitake never actually betrayed him, as he's smart enough to know that Ichigo would have seen through this, and believes that instead he left it up to Ichigo to make a choice about his future, to make that choice to protect, which Ginjo turned his back on. After Ginjo's death, when Tsukishima tries to kill Ichigo in a last-ditch attack, Rukia leaps in front of him, only for Rukia to sacrifice herself, and then later everyone recuperates in Urahara's shop. When Ichigo returns to Soul Society, Kyoraku talks with Ukitake, who feels remorse over how Ichigo was treated, before they both realise that the boy has matured. And so we finally reach the 1000-year Blood War arc, and it opens with, yes, you guessed it, another look at the 13th Division, as we see brand new recruits Shino and Yuki are being assigned to Karakura Town after Kuromadani Zenosuke quits, or he's fired, I don't know. But they're quickly attacked by Hollows before being rescued by Ichigo and the others, and are then ordered to return to the Soul Society for Chojuro Sasakibe's funeral. Rukia is present for the first Vice-Captain's meeting we get to see her in, and then Shino and Yuki later prepare for battle and are told of the history of the Quincy by the 13th Division's 6th seat, Hidetomo Kajamaru. Then, when the first Quincy invasion begins, Rukia tells Sentaro and Kione that she's heading to one of the Flame Pillars, while Shino and Yuki look on in horror as Kajamaru is killed by Ugram Hashwolf. Over the course of this first battle against the Vandenreich, Rukia and Ukitake take on different opponents, both of whom remained unknown during the source material. In the anime, Rukia's mystery opponent is revealed to be Meninus Macallon, whereas this black-haired Sternritter that Ukitake takes on, while not revealed in the anime, I'm pretty sure by deduction must be Askin Naklavar, as it's revealed that there are 16 individual Sternritter Reiatsu in the Soul Society, and I think we know who all 16 of these are, and Nyanzol Wyzol, who many people believe to be taking on Ukitake, can't be one of them. Upon sensing Byakuya's defeat, Rukia tries to run to him, only to be knocked out by Meninus. After the invasion, Rukia recuperates in the infirmary and speaks briefly with Ichigo, wondering what's on his mind. This is their only interaction until the very end of the series, pretty much. Meanwhile, Ukitake leads the ceremony of mourning around Yamamoto's Zanpakuto while the captains begin to argue. Somehow unconscious again, despite the fact that she was seemingly stable and alright enough to be talking with Ichigo, Rukia is then taken to the Royal Palace by the Zero Division, where she is healed in Korinji Tenjiro's hot springs. She doesn't come to until later on, where she and Renji receive new clothes from Senjumaru Shutara and eventually train in Ichibei Hyosebe's sanctum. At the same time, the Vandenreich begins its second invasion, and from outside the Seirete, Sentaro and Kione look on in horror as Ukitake bathes in a strange shrine. Much later, Rukia and Renji, having been empowered by the Zero Division, blast down from the Royal Palace and engage the Sternritter. Rukia rescues Rose and Kensei from Masked Masculine, leaving them both with Isane in a makeshift infirmary. She's then confronted by Äs Nödt, who battles her until she seemingly kills him, but he breaks free of her ice after using his holy form and almost destroys her mind with fear. However, Byakuya arrives, rescuing Rukia, and gives Rukia the motivation she needs to activate her bankai and kill Äs. After this battle, which would be Rukia's last major fight of the series, she and Byakuya head to where Kenpachi Zaraki is being attacked and is near death, before sensing Ichigo's impending arrival. When several Sternritters surround Ichigo, ambushing him, Rukia arrives with a group of Shinigami to defend him. She successfully freezes Bazby's arm before rushing into fight. However, their battle is interrupted by Yuhabark's burst of power, and Rukia and Renji end up dueling Bazby alone. They later watch as he is robbed of some of his power by the Owls Valen before the two of them return to the Shinigami's new stronghold. At the same time, as the battle now rages above in the royal palace, Ukitake returns to the Seirete. He speaks briefly with Kyoraku, revealing he has enacted the ritual of Kamikake in preparation for the palace being infiltrated. Once in the stronghold, once all the Shinigami are gathered together, they prepare for their assault on the royal palace. Ukitake is revealed to have already been there helping to heal the wounded, and when the Soul King is killed and all worlds are threatened, Ukitake steps in, releasing the Kamikake and revealing himself to be possessed by the right arm of the Soul King, Mimihagi. Housing this strange god in his body all his life, Ukitake sacrifices himself and gives up his body to become a substitute right arm, allowing Mimihagi to stabilize the now dead Soul King and in turn the world itself. This is Ukitake's big moment here in the 1000-Year Blood War arc. He unfortunately doesn't really get a fight at all and instead has to make do with this, but unfortunately it is short-lived, as when Yhwach in the palace destroys and absorbs Mimihagi, Ukitake is killed as Rukia, Sentaro and Kione look on in dismay. It was cool to have Ukitake's illness be brought to the forefront like this, to actually have a reason be given for it, and actually an explanation be given as to why he couldn't just be healed either, because he's housing this grotesque god, this limb of the Soul King inside his body all the time. And it is cool to see him step up during what is definitely Bleach's biggest moment of crisis in the story so far. It's just a shame it is so short-lived and it results in his actual death as well. Anyway, later when Aizen arrives to assist the Shinigami in fending off the Soul King's overflowing Reiatsu, Rukia is extremely vocal in her disapproval of him being there, but he in turn commends her on her promotion since the last time they met. But Rukia and the others then head to the royal palace, where both Sentaro and Kione are eventually sniped by Lil Barrow. Rukia and the remaining Shinigami confront Gerard Valkyrie, really the last obstacle between them and Yhwach himself, but he quickly takes her out. Much later, she and Renji return to the battlefield. I can only assume that she was actually unconscious, or else she's been doing nothing this entire time, but are ordered to go to Ichigo's side. The two of them make it to the very peak of Varvelt, but once there, they discover Ichigo has been defeated, and Rukia, as she kind of helps Orihime up, as she kind of cradles her, wonders how they can possibly defeat a power as the Almighty. And this is the last time we get to see Rukia and the 13th Division during this big war itself. The next time we see them is 10 years later, and Kyoraku is speaking with Ukitake by his graveside while Rukia is being made captain of the 13th Division. Later, she and Renji visit Ichigo's house to watch Chad's big title fight as their daughter Ichika meets Ichigo and Orihime's son, Kazui, and the series comes to a close. But of course, we also have the Hell chapter now as well, and 2 years after becoming captain of the 13th Division, Rukia chats with Ichigo over Renji's phone, showing how unaware of technology she can be, and Rukia and Renji listen as Mayuri's hologram appears before she and the other captains gather in front of Ukitake's grave to begin his Konso Reikai ritual. Meanwhile, in the human world, everything suddenly begins to go crazy. Sentaro, now the sole vice captain, fights these strange hell hollows alongside the rest of the vice captains until a gigantic Sogyo no Kotowari reaches out from the gates of hell, impales Xyloporo Grands as Ukitake, now with the hell-given epithet of Kamikake Godsworn, drags him back to the underworld. In the Soul Society, Rukia looks on in horror as the captains realise they have been condemning their fallen comrades to hell for centuries, which is now where Ukitake resides. But that's finally it for the 13th Division. Like I said, even if Ukitake doesn't have a big role to play at all, Rukia absolutely does. So there's an awful lot of story to cover, basically chapter 1 right the way through to the Hell chapter at the very end. But the 13th division is a really intriguing one, I think. Like I said, despite not having any real standout qualities, they are intimately tied to the main storyline. We spend perhaps the most time with them out of any division due to Rukia's role as almost the secondary protagonist of Bleach. And I really love this division's vibe, its overall welcoming nature, its friendliness, its kindliness, all of this encapsulated in perhaps the warmest division of them all, and that's reflected in its captain, and it's reflected in its members as well. But guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video, our last installment in the Gotei 13 series, where each month we took a look at the individual divisions that made up the massive military organization at the very center of Bleach itself. Like I said, I really hope you enjoyed it. Which division of the Gotei 13 is your absolute favourite? Do let me know in the comments below. What do you think of the 13th division? Who's your favourite 13th division character? What's your favourite 13th division moment? I'd love to hear all of this. Do please let me know in the comments below. Make sure to hit subscribe if you haven't done already. But until next time, I'll catch you later. And I'll see you then.